Welcome to the 2020 Libertarian Party of South Dakota presidential debate. Tonight, South Dakota is proud to present you our top 3 candidates seeking the nomination for President of the United States. The candidates: Adam Kokesh, a libertarian political activist, podcast host, author, and United States Marine Corps combat veteran running on the single-issue platform of an orderly dissolution of the federal government. Judge Jim Gray, a jurist and writer. He was the presiding judge of the Superior Court of Orange County, California. Gray was the 2012 Libertarian Party vice presidential nominee, as well as the party's 2004 candidate for the United States Senate in California. Dr. Jo Jorgensen is an American academic. She was the Libertarian Party nominee for vice president in the 1996 U.S. presidential election as the running mate of Harry Brown. She was also the Libertarian nominee for South Carolina's 4th Congressional District in 1992. Tonight, the candidates ask the questions that matter most to them. 3 rounds. 2 questions each. Are you ready? The 2020 Libertarian Party of South Dakota presidential debate begins now.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 2020 Libertarian Party of South Dakota presidential debate. My name is Cj Abernathey, and I will be your moderator this evening. Joining me tonight are the top 3 Libertarian Party of South Dakota candidates for President of the United States of America. Tonight's debate will be unlike any debate you have seen so far, in a format that is designed to allow each candidate to have more of a conversation than a debate. Tonight, joining me, it is my honor to introduce Adam Kokesh, Judge Jim Gray, and Dr. Jo Jorgensen. Each of these campaigns have answered this call with only a few short days' notice, and for that, we in South Dakota are not only grateful, we are honored to put on this debate for you all tonight. Before we begin tonight, I would like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of my fellow 2020 Libertarian Party of South Dakota Executive Committee members. Gideon Oaks, Chairman; Greg Baldwin, Vice Chairman; Ashley Strand, Secretary; Daryl Root, Treasurer; Devin Saxon, Communications Director; Nikki Fosham, Membership Director; Colin Duprell, West River Coordinator; Tracy Quint, Sioux River Coordinator; our at-large members, Kent Wilsey, Tara Volsky, and Jared Baldwin. I am the East River Coordinator for the Libertarian Party of South Dakota. Candidates, tonight's debate, will consist of 3 rounds where each of you will get to ask the other candidate 1 question each per round. The candidates will have 1 minute to ask each question. It is up to the candidate to choose who you ask your question to and when during each round. But you may not ask a question to the same candidate twice in 1 round. Each of you will start and finish 1 round each. Each responding candidate will have 2 minutes to answer your question. Each of you have 2 available rebuttals to use at your discretion. Time not used for rebuttals will be added to your closing remarks. If a candidate goes over time, that time will be subtracted for your closing time remarks. When you see me appear on the screen, you will have 10 seconds to finish your question or answer. At the end, we will have closing remarks from each candidate. Each candidate starts with 4 minutes for closing remarks. We will open tonight's debate with 3 minutes for you to introduce yourself. Candidates, do you understand the format of tonight's debate? Awesome. We have decided the order to each round prior to the debate by flipping a coin using the LPSD new bylaw for determining a tie. And I will say that Dr. Jorgensen will go first. Ma'am, your first question goes to Oh, I'm sorry. Introductions. My apologies, ma'am. This is my first time. Introductions. My apologies.
got actually great ballot access laws, but I helped collect petitions in Illinois and North Carolina. And I served as county chair and state vice chair and ultimately ran for Congress in 1992. By the way, when I ran for, or when I was the county chair, I actually organized the party because it hadn't been organized for a while.
Ma'am,
So
I'm being told on Facebook, ma'am, that nobody could hear you, and it wasn't an issue on our air. So I want to have you restart. A Facebook audio stream was going down.
okay.
My apologies. Again, this is all new technology for everybody. So again, you have 3 minutes, and again, my apologies to the candidates.
Well, thank you. This was just that was just a great practice session. So
I don't mind hearing it again. It was so beautiful and perfect. Every American heard that you would win this election cycle. That was how good. I don't know if you can match that, Joe, but that was amazing.
Okay, Adam, you just used up 7.62 seconds of my time. I'm resetting it. So thank you, South Dakota, for inviting me. I'm Dr. Joe Jorgensen, and I'm running for president because government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, and worst of all, it usually hurts the very people they're trying to help. I'm a senior lecturer at Clemson University. I have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology and a Master of Business Administration from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. So many of you might remember me as Harry Brown's 1996 running mate. I'm very proud that together we doubled the party size when we ran for office. It's the largest growth, the largest membership growth in Libertarian Party history. So I first discovered the Libertarian Party in 1979 when I heard Honey Lanham on a local Dallas radio show. And I attended the very next meeting I could, and I was just so excited to be introduced to the world of libertarianism. The first vote I ever cast for a president was for Ed Clark, the Libertarian presidential candidate in 1980. So I formally joined the Libertarian Party after moving to Greenville, South Carolina in '83. I did all of the volunteer stuff. I volunteered at fair booths, collected petition signatures, and I was state vice chair. I also organized the local party because the local county party, because at the time they weren't even having meetings, and became county chair. While running with Harry, I should mention, I campaigned in 32 different states, and I was on over 300 radio shows. So I would like to challenge people in the audience to ask all of their candidates, not just the people who are here tonight, but all of the candidates, would they use their authority, if elected, as commander-in-chief to end our involvement in foreign wars, stop subsidizing the defense of wealthy allies, and bring the troops home? I will. Would they use their pardon power to free people convicted of exposing government corruption, violating unconstitutional dictates, or committing crimes without a victim? I would. Would they get rid of the onerous IRS, which is too intrusive, too bossy, too nosy, and is involved in our everyday lives to the point that every time we get a letter in the mail addressed from the IRS, we almost have a heart attack? I would get rid of them as soon as possible. Our nominee has to be better than just a better option to Trump or Biden. Our nominee must be deeply principled with a long-term commitment to our party. My commitment has been 40 years. Communicate libertarian ideas in a way that non-libertarians will understand so we can grow the party and show the benefits of bold libertarian proposals. My address is joj2020.com. Please visit my campaign and join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. The next introduction will be Judge Jim Gray. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, CJ. Thank you. And it's nice to be with you and good folks in South Carolina. Many of you know me as having been the Libertarian vice presidential candidate with Governor Gary Johnson in 2012, but I go back way before that. Actually, I have as good or better a background as any presidential candidate in this race from any party. I was in the Peace Corps. I care about people. Y todavía puedo hablar español como la gente, if you care. I was in the Navy. In fact, before that, in my second year of law school, I actually led a peace march from USC campus to the steps of City Hall in Los Angeles. We mailed 20,000 letters to President Nixon saying, get our troops out of Cambodia. That was my involvement at that time. Then one of the ironies of my life, I was actually on a midshipman cruise within about 2 or 3 months of that in the rivers of Vietnam on the USS Meeker County. All of us were awarded combat action ribbons on that. So I've seen it on both ways. I was a Navy JAG attorney for quite a while, but also then I was a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, ended up by prosecuting frauds against the VA, FHA. I put a lot of bank vice presidents actually in prison, held them accountable. Those are not going to be pardoned either, by the way. And then I was a judge for 25 years. So I'm a trial court judge. As a judge, you're trained to listen. You're trained to evaluate. You're trained to assess credibility of witnesses and information, and then make a decision and explain it. And that's what our administration will do. Larry Sharp, Judge Jim Gray, we are going to be a unifying candidacy, both for the Libertarian Party, because we have no baggage. We have a long background in helping down ballot candidates. And I ran for US Senate in 2004. Actually, David Nolan was active in my campaign. And also then, of course, as vice president. So we bring something to the table. And talk about libertarian values, talk about libertarian courage. Actually, in 1992, a long time ago, 28 years ago, as a sitting trial court judge, I held a press conference announcing the obvious to me that our nation's policy of drug prohibition had failed us and we simply had to change it. So I put my boots on the ground, put my professional life at risk, but that's where we are. So this is what we're doing. We are presenting a campaign that will reason with people. We will audit, we'll focus a light on what's going on. Because if you just scare people, you actually just come out there and say, by thunder, I want all or nothing, you almost get nothing. You almost always just get nothing. Yes, you get some purity points for being radical and the rest, but we want to move that ball forward. In fact, talk to any football coach. The team that wins the most first downs almost always wins the game. We want to move the ball down the field. We want to win the game. So that's who we are, graysharp2020.com. Visit us, join us, share us, work with us, help us move mountains. And I promise you, I vow to you that if you do, or even if you don't, we will do you proud. That I assure you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Judge. Adam Kokesh, your introduction, sir.
Thank you so much, CJ, for putting this together, for all your hard work for the South Dakota Libertarian Party. And it's been an honor to be able to join you guys in your virtual conventions and other gatherings so far over this election cycle. You know, I have a fun connection with the state of South Dakota, having lived there for a summer, and I think got the quintessential South Dakota experience of having wrecked a motorcycle during Bike Week. So I've got that great credential with the South Dakota delegates, but it's been an honor connecting with so many of you to have done events with Lisa Nolan in prior tours for the Freedom Book, and to be in a position now to talk to you in this really unique conversation. I'm so grateful that we get to have this conversation between the three of us as candidates in this question format. And I want to take an attitude towards this of, you know, I'm a delegate from the state of California voting on who the nominee of the Libertarian Party is going to be. And if I'm looking at Judge Jim Gray and Dr. Joe Jorgensen, I'm looking at two awesome candidates. I mean, both of these are people that we would be proud of, that I would be honored to support as organizing Veterans for Jorgensen or Veterans for Gray, and being able to say that we can bring the party around these messages. I think what I'm offering is a unique strategic advantage, particularly for the crisis that we find ourselves in today. And I mean, let's be honest, the virus we're looking at has a lower mortality rate than testifying against Hillary Clinton. And anytime I mention her name, I have to say, I am not now, nor have I ever been suicidal. But what we need is someone who can bring people together, someone who can relate to people on different issues, someone who, and I agree with a lot of the strategic considerations brought up by Dr. Jorgensen and Judge Gray, that we can't go for all or nothing, that we have to have a vision of a single step that people can take together, that can unite Americans. And that's what localization is, the everybody gets what they want strategy. A peaceful, orderly, responsible dissolution of the federal government that leaves us with 50 independent states and up to 562 sovereign native nations. In order to be pragmatic as a party to take advantage of this opportunity, we have to look at what works. We have to look at what's polling well. In 2014, secession was already polling over 25% nationally. Let's give the American people what they want and win. I think as a candidate with name ID, with a lot of history in civil disobedience, and especially now when in this coronaphobia crisis, most Americans are doing some form of civil disobedience, responding to these ridiculous lockdown, shutdown, state of emergency orders at the state, local, and federal level. We can unite people and connect with them on all the issues, but more importantly, stop playing their game, arguing issue by issue. Instead, unite people, taking issue with the fact that people in Washington, D.C. are trying to force their will on the rest of us.
Thank you, Adam, for your introduction. All right, candidates. So now that I haven't dropped the football here, I will say that we are starting our first round with Dr. Jorgensen, and your question goes to?
First of all, feel free to call me Joe if you like. And Adam, I really appreciate you calling me Dr. Jorgensen. I think that was the first time. May I call you Adam?
As long as you don't call me Sergeant, yeah, please. Adam's great.
Okay. And Judge Gray, may I call you Jim? Okay, thank you. Well, please call me Joe if you don't mind. So I guess this question then, Adam, I'll pick you first. So you've been offering a somewhat theoretical solution of localization where we get rid of the federal government and we leave it to the states. And we say that the states, that people are better represented by the states, that they're closer to their government. But practically speaking, in the past, we've had in the South, for instance, we had lynchings. A lot of times the people didn't even get charged. It was whites lynching blacks. Either the whites didn't get charged or sometimes they weren't even convicted. So aren't you concerned about something like that? Who is going to protect individual rights against the state and local governments, which sometimes really cause the most egregious injustices?
Right. No, that's a great question. I appreciate the opportunity to answer this from the perspective of a question that we would get from a typical voter when proposing localization. And it's a very important one that we have a good answer to. And first of all, when you raise the horrific part of American history of the period of lynchings without punishment, that happened in the era of the federal government. The federal government did not stop that from happening. What stopped that from happening wasn't any law. It was a change in the paradigm. It was a raising of our consciousness of seeing across racial divisions and making sure that we have an expectation of peace and respect for individual rights. The greatest impact of Martin Luther King Jr. was changing the culture, not changing the law. And so when you raise the specter of states getting more tyrannical without the federal government, it's not very realistic because already the federal government is not an effective check. Now, to the certain degrees that it may be, I mean, already it's federal laws that prevent felons from owning firearms. It's federal laws that back up corporatism, that back up family courts, that back up everything government does with the US dollar, that is backed by the Federal Reserve System, the fiat currency that is forced on us as an entire country. So those governments inherently become a lot less vicious with the government's protection from the federal level, empowering state governments to do all of these evil things. It's true that state and local governments aren't magically going to become perfectly ethical institutions, but right away, it's going to be easier to contain them, to restrain them when they're not empowered by a bigger central authority. They're going to be more customized, more transparent, more accountable in every way. And if you really want to make the argument from current history or our current experiences or from history, you would see that the evils, even done in modern times by the federal government, in terms of the federal systems of welfare and taxation and fiat currency, but especially in the warfare state, far outweigh the crimes and transgressions of local governments. Drug war especially is a big part of that.
Again, my apologies for the hot mic there. My daughter walked in the house here. She doesn't know I'm hosting a presidential debate, so my apologies. All right, so that was Dr. Jorgensen's first question for Adam. Judge Gray, your first question goes to?
Okay, well, let me ask Joe then.
Thank you.
I've heard you say several times, Joe, and I admire the sentiment that you're going to bring all the troops home. My question to you is, don't you understand that, of course, we have obligations? We may have some contracts with various countries that we will keep our military reservations in different places. We also have, I believe it's important for the national security interests of the United States to have freedom of the seas. So do you feel that we should keep the oceans open for trade? If that's the case, maybe we'll need some bases and some military personnel overseas. And if only we have Marines that are around the world in our embassies, protecting our embassies. So don't you agree that it's going to be a lot slower process than just, boom, let's just bring all the troops home, end of that?
Absolutely, it's not going to be, we're going to bring them all home the first day. In fact, I've compared this to Social Security. As you know, you and I agree that Social Security should be a little more gradual because we can't yank the rug out on the first day. I've actually used the same example for bringing the troops home. We don't have enough planes and boats to bring them home the first day anyway. So logistically, it's impossible. However, I would meet with the Pentagon on the first day to start arranging to get them home as systematically and as soon as possible. So to answer your questions, wouldn't there be some base somewhere? Perhaps. But here's my point. The default needs to be bring them home. Now, are there maybe some threats we're getting from other countries that we don't know about? Is it possible that maybe the president currently knows about some place where we need to keep 1 or 2 bases open? Maybe, and I would have that information. But the default needs to be bring as many troops home as possible. And you asked about the oceans and open for other open for trade. Again, quoting Bastiat about goods, when goods cross borders, troops don't have to. The example that I used was in the early 80s, I had a Fiat Spitfire. I like to drive. And I had this older gentleman come up to me in the parking lot, and he kind of had a scowl on his face. And first I was worried I might have cut him off or something, but I thought I was driving nicely. But he came up to me and he looked at my car and he said, I was in World War II. How dare you buy an Italian car? And, you know, he served our country, so I didn't want to get into an argument with him over it. But what I would have liked to have said to him is, hey, look, if we keep buying cars from Italy, guess what? They're not going to bomb us. When we buy Toyotas from Japan, they're not going to bomb us. I don't know why people would want to bomb or hurt the ocean ways to get to their best customers.
Mr. Kokesh, you have a rebuttal, sir. 1 minute.
Is it 1 minute? Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and I think it's really important that we put the issues of war and peace front and center for the Libertarian Party. In the question, Jim suggested that we have obligations based on things that the government has said in the past and deals with other governments. The idea that you can force those obligations on people who didn't have a say in it, that you can force the American taxpayers or American troops to honor obligations. It's like you can't force a contract on someone without their consent. I don't think those obligations are legitimate of keeping bases open. We can start the process immediately. Of course, logistically, yeah, it's a process. It's going to take some time. But to say this is the goal starting now, bring all the troops home, close all the foreign bases without compromise, we unite the American people who are generally anti-war and tired of the duopoly that is pro-war in the military-industrial complex. This is how we unite the American people against the duopoly, is by not compromising on our anti-war positions.
All right. That was the judge's question. So the next question goes to Mr. Kokesh.
Yeah, so I guess my first question would be for Dr. Joe Jorgensen. Joe, excuse me. Yes, I like the attitude here in this debate. And, I ask this as someone who, has spent some time on the trail with you before we got locked down as non-essential personnel, right? Libertarian candidates definitely going to be in government's non-essential category. And I have a lot of respect for the campaign you've run so far, the way you've represented your message. The concern that I get from a lot of my supporters, if you're the nominee, is the time that you've spent away from the party. This is the one big problem I had with Gary Johnson. So what I want to give you the opportunity to talk about, the criticism of, hey, you've kind of been disengaged for 20 years, but also give you a chance to talk about all the things that if you're the nominee, what would you do to help build the party and leverage that title over the next 4 years?
First of all, I would say I've not been disengaged. I've been to some national conventions. In fact, the last convention, it was kind of funny. I went just as a delegate, sitting in my seat, and I had a few people come up to me saying, hey, I know who you are. You're hiding here like you're just a delegate like everybody else, but we know who you are. So basically, I did my duties as a delegate. I also went to state executive committee meetings. I helped reorganize the Greenville Party meeting. Here's the thing. When you run for vice president or president, there's not much more of a high, where people get to see you, high profile, let's say high profile position. So how many positions are higher profile than vice president? I guess president. So no, I didn't run for president. And I'd like to point out that I purposely didn't run for president. In 2000, I really wanted to run so bad. However, Harry Browne was deciding to run again. And I just think Harry Browne is one of the best presidential candidates we've ever had because he's practical and principled. He didn't sell out the platform, not one single sentence, and yet he presented the message in a way that people could understand and people would flock to our party. He would ask people, imagine without an income tax, what would you do with an extra $300 a week that the government doesn't take out? What about, an extra $8,000 a year or whatever you would get, go on a vacation, buy a new car. Also, a lot of people don't know this, but the person who helped me run my 96 campaign, I had actually contacted him to run for the presidential nomination in 2012. And we worked endless hours on putting together a campaign. But we both agreed that if Gary Johnson decided to run, that I wouldn't run. And then he announced he was running. So we didn't put together a campaign. I can say, unlike a lot of people from the old time, the old timers back then, I'm still here. I'm still fighting for liberty. And I think I've got the best message out there that will attract people to the party.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Jorgensen. All right. So that is, everybody's got to ask one question so far. So we go in reverse order in the round robin. So the next question is from Mr. Adam Kokesh.
Thank you, CJ. So, Jim, Judge Gray, I hate to go back to this because it is a bit of an esoteric issue, but it is pretty significant. Thinking if you're the nominee, if you take the position that an activist using First Amendment rights because they're on a courthouse grounds, that you would use the excuse, I think, of jury tampering to arrest them, even if they're not actually saying anything about a particular case. And I don't think you really answered the question in the debate last night with the Libertarian Party of Kentucky. I've done this before. I have gone and done protests on courthouse grounds and said, like, I have a right to be here. If I have a right to be here, I have a right to express myself here. And as a libertarian, I'm concerned that if you're the nominee, I'm going to have to apologize for a position like that, which it comes down to you would arrest people for expressing themselves somewhere they have a right to be. So is that really the case?
Well, Adam, as you know, at least I think you know, life is complicated. We have problems. We have to make decisions. I made a mistake, by the way, on that podcast where I was asked the question, do I support jury nullification? And I immediately went to the second part of the question and I actually thought until they played it back for me that I had answered the first part. I do favor jury nullification. I believe that that's a really important buttress between over prosecutions and the people. It's a civilian control over the government. Hooray for that. And if a jury finds a defendant not guilty, end of discussion, no appeal, it's over. Okay. Now, the second part of jury nullification was, should I as a judge instruct the jury that the laws don't matter? Well, I'm not prepared to do that. And the example I use is, okay, what if you have somebody charged with wife beating? And you have some crusty old fellow on the jury saying, oh, well, she mouthed off to her husband. He slapped her around a little bit. No big deal. And the judge instructs that the laws don't matter. That's not what we want. It results in injustices. So now the question you asked is more First Amendment. And again, it's a problem. Let's say that you're now in my courtroom and the jury is on the stand and you come in, which you have every right to be there, you into the courtroom and say, hey, I know this guy. He's really a good guy. You don't want to convict him. That undercuts the entire system of justice. It ends up so somebody else yells louder for the jury. It's called jury tampering. It's not it's an offense. It's a crime, and it should be, and I stand on that. You don't want to bribe jurors. You don't want to throw in the various things into jurors, make it a shouting match. So we need a judicial process. I was a judge for 25 years. This is the position I take. So now instead of being inside my courtroom, maybe you're out in the hallway petitioning the jurors while they're coming into the room. The answer is no. It's the same problem. Maybe some people like it, maybe they don't, but this is my position and I'll stand with it. And so will pretty much every judge. So that's kind of where we are. It's a question of degree. You can write all the op-ed pieces you want. You can petition across the street, but not inside the courthouse grounds. That's my position, and I'll stand on it. I think it's valid.
All right, Mr. Kokesh, you have a rebuttal. You have 1 minute, sir.
Yeah, I'll take a minute here because I think this is still kind of avoiding the question when you go into the courtroom and you say talking about a specific case. Yeah, that's jury tampering. I agree that there's a problem with that or even interfering with that process. But you would say that on courthouse grounds where it's outside, where they're not talking about the case, where they're just talking about nullification, that you would arrest them. And then would you have instructed anyone as a judge, even in cases where you thought the law was unjust and you wanted that to happen, you wanted that to be expressed? And this comes down again to the ethical thing, no victim, no crime. And I would give you the last 15 seconds here to say, would you pardon everybody that you can as president for victimless crimes?
Well, you don't have many victimless crimes in the federal system, but the answer is I would look at all of these issues. I would take a commission to look on a case-by-case basis on every case. People felt they were factually innocent, we'd look into those. It's an outrage. People were spent much too much time in prison, you would commute. And yes, I would pardon some as well. But at any rate, it's a question of degree, Adam, where inside the courtroom, outside in the hallway, down the hallway, where do you draw the line? And I would draw the line on court property. It's a defined line, and it also values people's First Amendment rights. Life is complicated, Mr. Kokesh.
Thank you, Judge. I believe the next question is yours, Judge. So, and you asked, and it's your question, sir.
Okay, and thank you again, CJ. By the way, I think I said South Dakota before, or excuse me, South Carolina. When I was running for vice president, people asked me, what's the hardest thing in the campaign? And the answer was remembering my hotel room's numbers each time.
Yes, sir. So it's your question, sir.
I got you. Adam, you did me the favor of giving me your book, Freedom, which was really well done, and I congratulate you for that. But I noticed nowhere in this book that I have found is your name as the author. I've written 4 books and 2 musicals. Don't call me out, but I actually put my name on the cover. Why did you not? And if you were to do it again, would you put your name on it?
Thanks. That's a beautiful answer, or beautiful question, Jim. And I really appreciate the opportunity to plug my book. And of course, I got to start by saying I'm not running for president to sell books. This book is free in every digital format possible at thefreedomline.com, and including audiobook. And we sell these for as close to at cost as we possibly can. And you're right to point out that my name is not on the cover, and that's because I wanted to put the message first. I wanted to create a tool to wake people up. And there is a brief about the author section in the back. I can't say that I'm not taking responsibility for this publication, but I think it's something that we all kind of grapple with as libertarians in terms of the personality cults of politics in the old parties and in statism, where you're making an appeal to authority and saying, well, because I look good in a suit and I talk nice, well, you should follow me and do what I say and vote for me and give me power over you. And it's like, no, we're kind of rejecting that. I think it has to be inherent in our message that we don't incorporate that. So I would turn it back to, localization, individual empowerment, and really what it means to be a libertarian and respecting the rights of the individual, putting the message first. I think if you look back at the history of my activism, and I got to say, to share a stage with two former VP nominees, this is a cool, for me as an activist, never, really, truly an honor, never having imagined to share the stage with you guys. But I think if you look back at my history of activism, I've always put winning converts, growing the movement first over personal aggrandizement. And, it's a tough thing that we all grapple with, especially when I'm running for president. Well, I think in what my platform represents, throwing the ring in the fire, saying we don't need a president, we don't need a central government, we can decentralize it. That is, a further, manifestation of these values in policy. So thank you, Jim. I appreciate that opportunity.
All right, so to close out the first round, Dr. Jorgensen, this is your round and your last question, ma'am.
Okay, so of course this question has to be for Jim, and this is not intended to be a gotcha question. I'm actually kind of going to give you the opportunity because I have heard you. Well, actually, I do have one question about it because, as you know, we do differ here in that I follow the party platform of getting rid of the income tax and you don't. However, I noticed even as recently as last night's debate, you had to clarify, I'm not for a UBI, I'm for the negative income tax. So this is kind of a two-parter. Part of this is to give you the opportunity to explain, actually three-parter. Part of this is to give you the opportunity to explain, so what is the difference between the UBI and the negative income tax? So why is yours better? Secondly, you keep saying yours is like Milton Friedman, but I had some friends send me a video of Milton Friedman, and they said it isn't quite the way Milton Friedman proposed it. So I wanted to know if there's any differences from what Milton Friedman said. And third, we still would need an IRS, right? And an income tax.
I have an hour and a half to answer this question. Is that right?
Sure.
Okay. Life is complicated. And Joe, I can tell you right away, particularly with this coronavirus around it, we're not going to get rid of the income tax right away. It just flat out isn't going to happen. So I take about 80% of the way to getting rid of the IRS, getting rid of its intrusion, which is ungodly. It's bureaucracy, it's complication, it's expense. So this is what do we call it? A crutch to a ladder. You turn in effect, the welfare system. This encompasses a lot of things, and it really takes people away from poverty and allows them to climb up the ladder out of poverty. So it's complicated. Milton Friedman talked about the negative income tax for people that make no money. I extended it to a graduated flat tax. So that's the difference there, where you could actually submit your income tax forms on a postcard. H&R Block would not like the idea, neither would the IRS, neither would tax attorneys, but it would simplify things enormously. It will move the ball forward. It will allow people to have incentives always to earn the extra dollar, which is flat out not true with regard to our welfare state today and even Social Security. So it is a way. I've written the principles in it in our website. You can find it at graysharp2020.com or even at judgejimgray.com. I've probably written more about issues than any presidential candidate in history, 4 books, 2 musicals, that sort of thing, a podcast and a blog. So that's where it is. It is not a universally basic income, which basically is that would give a certain amount of money to everyone in the country, you, me, Bill Gates, and then you're going to give Bill Gates something like $500 a month and charge him an extra $500,000 a year in taxes to pay for it. No, I don't do that whatsoever. It's only based upon need. It is a negative income tax. I call it a stimulus instead because I don't like the word negative. It is Milton Friedman.
All right, and that concludes the first round of questioning. Candidates, appreciate you guys working through my issues here. It's not you, it's me. So as we determine the order, the next round starts with Judge Gray. Judge Gray, you can ask either of the candidates your first question.
Okay, well, let me ask Joe a question. We just talked about taxes, and where you do have a government, we do, for example, I believe we need a military. Don't tread on me. Well, I tell you, if we don't have a military, people are going to tread on us, trade or not. So they're bad people in the world. We also, I believe, need a judiciary. It's not going to be funded voluntarily. I don't want people to fund our judiciary voluntarily because then they buy more justice than other people. So we're going to need some money for government. We are going to have a presidency. We are going to have Congress, et cetera, et cetera. What ways would you raise money, Joe, I'm saying with the graduated flat tax and the negative income tax, it's 80% less intrusive than what we have now. What would you do to raise money for the federal government?
Thank you for that question. So as I mentioned last night, I do follow the platform. According to the non-aggression principle, as I mentioned last night, I would run the military through fees. And a lot of people see that as being unworkable, but David Friedman, I believe it was mentioned many years ago, look at people who ride in taxi cabs in New York City. The chances of you ever getting the same cab driver ever again is just about zero. They don't even know your name, and yet most people tip. Because most people understand, Americans understand they need to pay for what they get. So the history of our country is we're very charitable, we understand our obligations, and we understand our responsibilities. Now, unfortunately, the way government is working now, it's taking that incentive away from us, that it's taking that, American inventiveness out of us, and that is very distressing. So the only way we can get rid of the income tax is to absolutely cut spending and cut it immediately. We've got to cut it everywhere we can. And I'm often asked the question, well, where would you cut government the most? And my question is, well, instead of talking about where we cut government, how about let's talk about where we keep it? So there are so many things we don't need. And also, and I want to make sure that I answer your question fully because you also asked about the military. Our military costs would go down dramatically if we bring the troops home. Right now, we've got a lot of troops based in wealthy Europe. There's no reason why we need to be paying for them. We need to bring them home and let France and Germany and the other countries, let them worry about it. So what we need to do as far as welfare goes in general, we've got a lot of corporate fat in there. Right now, we've got corporate welfare that's even worse than individual welfare. And I think the first thing we need to do is cut out corporate welfare and then look at what we have as individual welfare.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, so the next question is Adam Kokesh, sir. Your question.
Thank you. I was a little shocked earlier to hear a judge say that I think as he said, there aren't that many federal laws with victimless crimes. There are tons, and we have whistleblowers and political prisoners in jail. We have people for drug violations, for weapons possession, things like this. And Dr. Jorgensen, Joe, one of the things that you've said that I think I really appreciate that you and I have in common, different from Jim here, is that what we are proposing, at least what you are proposing, would fundamentally transform the federal government into a voluntary institution because you would pardon everybody for victimless crimes. And as Dan Taxation and Steph Berman and Arvin Vohra have said in their platforms, being in some way the pardoner in chief would be critical to reining in the unethical policies of the federal government. So how would that transform? You talked about selling benefits, not features. How does transforming the government that way fundamentally translate into benefits for the American people?
Oh, so the question is for me?
Yes.
Okay, because you started off mentioning Jim's name. So, okay. So first of all, I would like to see a completely voluntary government. It's going to be a long time, I think, until we get there. I've said in the meantime, I'm fine with government being in charge of police, courts, and military, because I do agree with Jim Gray that we have to explain our position to the American people such that they will join our movement and they will vote for us. I completely agree that if you have an all or none solution, then you might get none. And I think if we go out there and we just say, hey, we're cutting grandma off on the first day, she's going to have to go to, some mythical private industry that's not there yet. They're not even going to listen to us. So I'm fine with police, courts, and military on the way to get there. But as far as how my system would look, again, bare to the bones, police, courts, and military. The nice thing about having all of these taxes being taken away is basically taxes are coercive. Yes, and by the way, yes, you brought up Dan Berman. I do believe taxes are theft. However, that is not my campaign style, again, because we need to bring Americans into the party based on what they want, not our beliefs. So I would tell the American people, look, there are no more disincentives for productivity. There's going to be less money in the pockets of politicians. That means more money in the hands of private industry that creates jobs. There have been studies that show that when private industry has the money, you get twice as many jobs created as the federal government. And that money has to come from somewhere. So why not let the private individual decide where that money goes to, instead of a politician who will just give it to a friend, a lobbyist, somebody, some special interest. So cutting taxes means more jobs. And especially that's important today with people wondering if they're even going to get a job again.
Great answer.
Okay, and the last question for the first half of this round is for Dr. Jorgensen. Your choice.
Okay. Well, gosh, Adam asked me such a nice one. I feel bad. Okay. No.
Lay your gotchas on me, because this is what we're in right now. I really love how this is going. And steel sharpens steel, and being able to examine our strengths and weaknesses, objectively, I think is a healthy part of this process.
I do too. And tell you what, our little discussion there will take off of my question time, and I'll ask a very quick question. How would you handle national defense if we had everything localized into 50 different nations?
Yeah, this is a great policy challenge within localization, because it represents the most significant shift in the paradigm. In a sense, I would say we've already made that shift. Most of America realizes that militarism is a cancer on this country, that the military-industrial complex that has been running, and I'll say to a large extent, the Israel lobby having an outsized influence on American foreign policy has led to so much corruption, so much ripoff. As Major General Smedley Butler said, war is a racket, and it is a vicious one, a destructive one, and we can unite the American people against the pro-war duopoly if we manifest this anti-war message in real policy. It's not enough to say, I'm against this war or that war. You have to say, I'm against people having the ability, I'm against governments having the power to start unjust wars in the first place. And the way we take that power away from them is to transition to the system of defense that the founders of this country advocated for. They were against anything that we would call a standing army, because they knew standing armies defended governments. Militias defended free people. A rifle behind every blade of grass. The system that they would have advocated for is a well-armed population that refuses to be governed by anyone. And I would point out, as Gandhi proved, the well-armed part is actually optional and might be slowing things down in terms of real progress towards a free and peaceful society. So pursuing a peaceful solution through consensus of localizing the military force, decentralizing it in a way that would still allow every state government with an apportionment of the resources held for defense by the federal government would still have outsized militaries by current global standards. This is one easy step that we can take together that the American people can unite on to say, let's make the Department of Defense actually defensive instead of so dang offensive. And we can bring the American people together with an anti-war message against the duopoly with decentralization of the military.
All right. And so, Dr. Jorgensen, your last question of this round, ma'am.
Okay, so Jim, I hate to beat this to death, your negative income tax, but if you are the nominee, you will be proposing this, and again, I think a lot of people will look at it and say, well, isn't that what Andrew Yang supported? You know, Andrew Yang, the Democrat. So I just want to, I'm just trying to understand this. I have one specific question, and it might be a concern. So my understanding is that under your system, you get like $15,000 a year. If you make nothing, you get $15,000 a year, right? Okay, so let's say you decide to go out and mow lawns and you make $10,000. Does that mean that you would lose $5,000 of your stipend? So isn't that a 50% tax rate? And isn't that like that would be the highest tax bracket of anybody, and it would be on the poor instead of the rich?
Well, your example is correct, Joe, but it's not a tax. You're just receiving less money from the government. You are making more money by going out and working. That's called an incentive. You're not entitled as such to this money, regardless of what you do. It's an incentive for you to improve yourself. I love incentives. As Milton Friedman said, incentives matter. Many others, best yet, did too. These are things that we would be doing. It's not a tax. It's not a tax at all. I mean, you can label it that if you want to. It's simply not accurate. You're just receiving less money from the government, but that's the deal. We need to have incentives for people. We need to provide a safety net, not because we have to. They're not entitled to it whatsoever, but we're a compassionate people. So the best way of helping people when they're down and out, I was in the Peace Corps. I care about people. I know that you do too. So we can help single moms, for example, if they're down on their luck. People that have just been released from federal prison or any prison. People that are just veterans. That, you know, we can provide this assistance to them to be able to move up out of poverty. Is it a tax? Yes, we are still. I'm openly acknowledging that. But as to the negative income tax or the flat tax above that, but it's not a tax the way you are bringing it out. It is a way that we assist people climb out of poverty, getting rid of all of this other bureaucracy and the welfare and the intrusion and the fraud and the degradation. We don't have food stamps anymore. We don't have aids to dependent children. None of these things are going to be those intrusions. It's a really good system. 80% of the way there, which I think in 5 years is doing pretty well.
Oh, can I get one of my rebuttals?
Yes, ma'am. Well, your rebuttal, ma'am.
Okay, so yes, I have a PhD in psychology. Trust me, I understand incentives very well. I spend 3 class days on behaviorism, positive, negative, rewards and punishment. So I completely understand, and absolutely people need incentive. But under your system, and don't call it a tax if you don't want to, call it confiscation, call it theft, call it extortion. I don't care what you call it. Basically, what you're saying is if somebody makes $10,000 from, like, they're making nothing this year, the next year they make $10,000, you're essentially taking half of it away, right? And is that an incentive if you take half away?
No, I'm not. No, they keep the entire $10,000.
But you're taking 5,000 away from the 15.
They get, yes, that's right. They get $5,000 less from the government. It isn't theirs to begin with. The 10,000 is theirs. The other comes from the government. It's not theirs until they receive it. It is a benefit. So they have an incentive to get fewer benefits, if you want to do it that way. But it is not a tax, not confiscation.
All right. So the next question in this round is from Mr. Adam Kokesh. Your last question of this round, sir.
All right, of course, keeping the timing fair, we're going to go with Judge Gray. Jim, you know, one of the things that has led to a lot of success with my campaign is that localization really connects with people on practical issues that they care about. That's why we have so many coalition groups. And just I got to give a shout out to my wife, of course, the love of my life, Samantha Morgan Miller Carnabucci Kokesh, who runs Exotic Entertainers for Kokesh. We've got gun owners for Kokesh, first responders, stoners, gender and sexual minorities, Christians. But one of the groups that I'm most excited about is Victims of Family Law. And Chris Cole from North Carolina has done an amazing job getting this message out to people who identify as victims of family law. And as a child of divorce, as someone who's seen people go through horrific divorces, people who have been afraid of CPS taking their kids away because their neighbors saw them smoking pot, you know, all of these things where government interference in family issues really pulls down quality of life for millions of Americans. I would ask you, as a candidate who's a judge, with the strength that in the platform that gives you, how would you address issues of family law?
Well, first of all, of course, there's almost no family law issues in federal court. So I could do it by leadership, but I can't control South Dakota or Georgia or whatever else. So you can by leadership. We have some bad things, Adam, going on in this nation. We have people that are allegedly stealing in probate. The people that are in charge of it being a trustee are stealing without, and even they allege that judges are involved in that. It's horrendous. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't bad things going on in the world, but we need to address them. We need to have confidence in our people such that we can address them openly. I say frequently, the word I love is audit, that we shine a light on all of these government activities, all of these government agencies, all of the rest. And if there's something going on where people are being abused, when I was in court, there was people who were trying to take away the children of parents that were smoking marijuana. I said, that's absurd. We're not going to do that. How are they treating their children? That's the only thing that matters there. So as a judge, I stood up and numbers of times chastised the organization for even bringing those charges. We only care about the children themselves. Oh, you have children that are being raised by gay parents. Yes, that's fine. Equality. How are the children being treated? So yes, there are a lot of bad things in this world. I think our country is doing pretty well on many of them. When you see one, publicize it. That's what I do. That's what I will continue to do from my bully pulpit as president.
Yeah, one quick follow-up, Jim. I thought the same thing before I looked into this, that the federal policy was mostly irrelevant since it's a lot of state stuff. But there are a few things in HHS policy and federal money. Would you at least commit to getting rid of all federal involvement in family court issues and getting all of the money out of incentives for foster care and the drug war and things that are related to it like that?
Adam, I don't just commit unilaterally without looking into it, but I will look into these things. I will publicize them. The answer is yes, that will be the intent, fully likely, but I just don't sign on to things without looking into them first.
That will be the last question of the second round will be from Judge Jim Gray. And sir, your last question of this round.
Well, Adam, let me share a concern with you. I really, and I know you do too, I really care about down ballot candidates. I care about CJ's election, for example, there in South Dakota. It's so important for a political party to elect people to the legislature, to the water district, whatever that might be, to get the word out. We have increasingly libertarians that way. Hey, I like what this libertarian is doing. I want more of them. So if you are running for president or you were to be elected president, and then you say that you would simply tear down the federal government, it's going to scare people. Don't you believe that this is going to cause problems for people that are running on the down ballot candidates for mayor or for city council or the rest? I'm just concerned about that. Please give it some thought.
Sure, Jim, and I appreciate the question. It's certainly a legitimate one, but I honestly, I don't appreciate the kind of fear-mongering that I get from you on this and from some of the other candidates we've seen in this cycle to say that people are going to be afraid of that. Well, what's the proof here? What's the evidence, the experience that I've had traveling the country for the last 2.5 years is that it's easier to talk to people about localization than a specific libertarian vision. And I think localization embodies your running mate when he says, Larry Sharp, quoting him, he says, a libertarian is someone who believes you can be as liberal or as conservative as you want, as long as you don't force it on anybody else. Most Americans get that idea pretty easy. I don't think they're scared. I've been building my social media following. I've been raising more money than anybody else in this race. People are excited about this. So, in terms of supporting local candidates, the idea of localization inherently supports local candidates. When we give in and we play their game and concede that we need this big central coercive authority, we are focusing or helping keep focus on the national politics, as opposed to saying, no, it should be local. You should have the right in your community to have whatever form of government you want. And I'll say this, at risk of alienating some delegates, I think both anarchists and minarchists are wrong. And Larry Sharp is right here to say you can have as much or as little government as you want, as long as it's voluntary. It's in the LP statement of principles. Where governments exist, they must be voluntary. How do we move in that direction? Localization. We don't have to argue issue by issue. People are more scared of the federal government. They're more scared of trusting someone to be president, especially after all of our recent experiences. This is a calm, reassuring message that says, look, we don't need big centralized government, and we don't need to force you into a system that doesn't represent your values.
Okay, that concludes the second round of questions. Candidates, you're doing well. I appreciate, again, you working with me through this. All right, so the last round starts with Mr. Adam Kokesh. Your first question.
Well, for the last round, I want to just, show my respect for the two other candidates I'm sharing the stage with, and, keep my questions relatively brief and cede the remainder of the time to ask them for advice, to say, as candidates who have represented the Libertarian Party on the national stage, if I were to be the nominee next weekend, what advice would you give me, and what lessons would you want whoever the nominee is to learn from sharing a stage with you and from learning from your experiences as VP nominees of our party?
Sir, just to clarify, that question goes to who?
Oh, I'm sorry. So let's just keep the order going. We'll go to Joe first, and then Jim, if you want to just remember that, same thing to you on the next turn.
Dr. Jorgensen.
Okay, Adam. So now I can't possibly ask you a gotcha question next time. So I'll ask the same question I was going to, but just in a nicer tone of voice. The best piece of advice I have I learned when I ran for U.S. Congress rather than president. So since I had already encountered it running, and I don't know if you've ever run for an office like that before, so maybe you've experienced this. But one of my first radio shows that I went to, and this was I guess I shouldn't even say the name, but he's a national guy now. And I went down there armed with all my, facts and figures. And I thought, we're going to just put our heads together and have a nice discussion here. And he's, by the way, very far, far, far right as you can get. And so I go down there thinking we're going to have this dialogue exchange and we're going to, try to solve problems. And I was just blindsided. I just got one, have you stopped beating your wife question after the next. And somebody even called, well, in fact, I'll tell you, it was Jim DeMint who called into the radio show. I don't think he was, I'm trying to think of, I don't think he was a senator yet, but he was really big anti-PAC. And
yeah, I know the name.
Yes, and if it's a voluntary PAC, then who cares if it's a PAC? But he was just like, you'd accept PAC money, how do you answer that? So I would enter every debate. Well, okay, that's the number one thing. The number two thing, which I think a lot of people have mentioned about Gary's campaign, I think what you have to do is have your platform, go in and say, this is what I'm talking about. And if they start asking you about this or this or this, say, this is what I'm here to talk about today, healthcare, and don't let them drag you off track.
Okay, and then the next question in this round goes to Dr. Jorgensen. Or I'm sorry, ma'am, it is, yes, you, ma'am.
Okay, so Adam, how would you answer, or how would you in your going to localization, handle Social Security and Medicare? Because I do agree with Jacob Hornberger that we need to follow the platform and we do need to get rid of Social Security. However, I also agree with Jim Gray that we can't just, throw grandma off the cliff and tell her on day one, you got to go find your own money. So if you're 60 years old, you've put money into a lockbox that isn't there, and you're retired and you're 60 years old and you can't go back to work, where are you going to get the money for retirement or Medicare, whatever you want to look at, if there's no longer a federal government?
That's a great question, and it is a tricky policy question for libertarians. How do we get from where we are now to our ideal without pulling the rug out from underneath anybody, without scaring anybody? And it is really critical that we acknowledge the obligations to individuals, the people whose lives literally depend on government. And this is where localization really gives us the answer that is the best of both worlds on this, in terms of saying we are going to put a sunset on this thing. It's kind of a sunset clause in policy to say that we are going to phase out the federal program. The way that we're going to do this, because the dollar system is not reliable, and one of my greatest fears if we were to actually elect a libertarian president is that the real string pullers of our current economic system would crash the dollar and blame it on the libertarian president, or engage in some other kind of economic manipulation. So we really do have to have a fundamental paradigm shift to go along with this policy shift in order to have any kind of meaningful change. And that's where I think localization with libertarian values backing it up really is the critical difference here. So for the federal program that we have today of Social Security, we have to provide a way that can be a bridge to states and the private sector coming up with better retirement programs. So as we liquidate the assets of the federal government, we are only going to accept AmeriCoin, which is a new digital currency that we are going to airdrop to issue to every single American by Social Security number. It's the only currency that we accept. It's backed by real assets because it's backed by the assets of the federal government. The $200 trillion at least worth of land that is 50% of the landmass that the government owns in states west of the Mississippi, all of the buildings and other assets of the federal government, we auction off over a 10-year period. So this asset is backed, or this asset-backed currency provides this transition that allows us to fund Social Security for at least 10 years. Now, I think this is better than trying to tinker with the federal system or save it or transition it. It's also easier to get a consensus on this rather than a specific federal program.
Okay, and the next question in this round goes from Judge Jim Gray. Sir, your question.
I would ask Joe, Doctor. CJ, just remember we do have the practice for the nomination for the party at 5 o'clock or 5 o'clock.
Okay, so we are back on the air. And again, my apologies for the technical issues that I seem to experience there. I had Zoom and Facebook crash on the same thing. So, but we're back. We're going to start with the last question of the second round. And it's Judge, your question.
Should I ask the same question I just did?
Yes,
when
sir.
we
were not live for the party.
All right. So we erased that last question, and I'll ask it again. Joe, I know you agree with this, but down ballot candidates are fundamentally important for political parties. And I try to do everything I can, so does Larry Sharp, to support down ballot candidates. And I know you do as well. So would you join me in endorsing the candidacy for a man named Cj Abernathey, who happens to be running for governor of South Dakota?
Absolutely, I would. I'll endorse him right here on the spot. And thank you for opening up that question, because down ballot access, down ballot candidates are very important. I mentioned before that, well, first of all, let me point out my experience when I ran for U.S. Congress was the VP candidate at the time, Nancy Lord, came and visited me, and my campaign manager had organized this venue where, it was like standing room only. It was great. And we were actually crowd surfed. Both of us were actually passed around the crowd. It was so much fun. And there was another time when I was at just a little local, like music kind of newspaper, one of those throwaway things I used to call them. And so I was there while the editor was calling Andre Maru, and he did a great job and really helped my campaign. So I have been on the receiving end. I have been a U.S. House Representative candidate who understands how important it is to have a good presidential nominee who will support them, who will do a good job of being the Libertarian figurehead. And also, I got to say that two things. First of all, I will also help down ballot candidates by sharing my research with them. So during our campaign, if I get the nomination, what I would do is I would have people research local events, current events, so that I'm not caught off guard by any surprise question. And what I would do is I would pass those same talking points, that same research, to every US Congress and US Senate candidate who wants the information. Also, I'd like to say that I would share the data in real time. That's what Harry Brown and I did. It doesn't do any good for a local candidate to find out new members' names a year later. They need that information today. They're running today. They need names today of donors and people who can help them. So thank you for that question.
Well, thank you for that endorsement. While I'm having technical difficulties, Mr. Kokesh, you have used 2 rebuttals already, sir.
No third?
No third, sir. All right.
Okay,
So,
I'll save it.
While I appreciate the endorsements, you guys, again, my apologies for the technicals, but we're right back up. So we have our last round. We'll try to get through it as quick as you guys can answer. And the first question of the last round comes from Mr. Adam Kokesh. Your question, sir.
Well, I'm going to take my minute for what I would have said in the rebuttal then to say, yes, I enthusiastically endorse Cj Abernathey, Libertarian candidate for governor of South Dakota. And I don't want to be left out of bragging about all the wonderful things that I can do for local candidates as well, because I think the 3 of us are certainly in agreement here that whoever is the nominee needs to be building the party, needs to be supporting local candidates. And I think one of the unique things that I offer as a candidate is the hustle and getting around and touring, as I have over my 14 years of committed, dedicated activism. Of all the tours I've done, we've connected with local candidates at every stop possible, brought them up on stage with us, and done everything we can to share my social media platform. So anybody who's running as a Libertarian, email me. Happy to help. Please, adam@thefreedomline.com. If you want anything shared on social media, happy to do it for you already. So, Jim, my question to you is the same as Dr. Jorgensen. What lessons and what advice would you have based on your experience as a VP nominee?
Adam, and thank you for that. And I applaud your tours. You are a patriot, and good for you. I would give you advice that, as I have said, you've heard me say it numbers of times, we're not going to be able to compete with the tens of millions of dollars with the Trumps and the Bidens in the big states. So we will choose 5 small states, and this is what I would recommend to you, to go on your tours, to go and see people directly, look them in the eye and say, your vote will make history. And then once we start rising, when they understand the Libertarian approach, then we'll start making progress in the polls. Then the rest of the country will start looking at that. So if we were to win 2 or 3 small states, that would get such attention. Even if we win 1 small state, that would help the party enormously. So I would recommend that to you. And by the way, then if we end up going to the House of Representatives, because neither side gets enough votes in the Electoral College, we could very well win the presidency. I commend that to you. Or any other candidate, by the way, that wins the nomination.
Yeah, I would just say that's a great answer and endorse that and say, yeah, strategic targeted campaigning to make sure we have a breakout year. I'm all for it.
Okay. I'm just going to assume that you're done with your question there. So then the next question of this round is from Judge Jim Gracer. Your question.
Okay. Well, Adam, you were in the military. Larry Sharp and I were as well, but I commend you for that. I truly do. Tell us, how was your transition from the military to civilian life? And do you think the current systems in place could have done a better job aiding in that transition?
Yeah, thank you, Judge. That's a very huge question, and one that brings up an issue that's really near and dear to my heart, and that's military and veteran suicides. I think it is one of the greatest tragedies of militarism that people who enlist for the right reasons and many times, as in my case, out of naivete. I think it was almost recklessly irresponsible of me to sign up to kill for politicians. And the fact that so many people are led to suicide as a result of their experience is a national embarrassment that has been swept under the rug for too long. Whether it's 20 or 22 or whatever it is, veteran suicide today, we know that's an underreported number. And I think the Libertarians, I say this in Libertarian debates, but really to the old party candidates, if you are running for president and you don't have a serious solution to the issue of veteran suicides, you should not be taken seriously as a candidate. And this is a great issue. I've heard so many great positions from fellow Libertarians on this. In my case, what I want to see is end the drug war, give us the freedom we allegedly fought for to at least treat ourselves as we see fit, to explore MDMA, psilocybin treatments, which are great alternatives to pharmaceuticals for PTSD therapy. Give us control of the VA. You can privatize it by giving every single veteran in America one ownership voting share. You do those two things, I guarantee without the special interests, the politicians, the bureaucrats in the way, you're not going to have 22 veteran suicides a day. In my case, I had trouble sleeping. I went to the VA in DC, the flagship of VA healthcare, talked to a shrink for 5 minutes, walked out of there with a little brown paper bag, 5 prescriptions in it. 3 of them had suicide listed as side effect. And I'm so grateful that I was in Iraq Veterans Against the War, that I had that supportive activist community around me to explore alternatives. I ended up starting and leading a PTSD peer support group called Homefront Battle Buddies. And the best alternatives to the VA, this shameful situation that we're in right now, come not from government, but come from the people coming together to take care of those who put their lives on the line to protect us for honorable reasons.
All right, sir. And then Dr. Jorgensen, your question, ma'am.
Okay, this is for Jim, and I'm going to give you, this isn't multiple choice as in the answer. This is multiple question as in you get to pick the question yourself. So I hate to stop this love fest we have going. So you may have your choice. The question I was going to ask you had to do with Social Security. I wasn't sure if the negative income tax would take care of Social Security. So in other words, would the maximum, it wouldn't?
No, it would not.
Okay, well then I will, since that was such a short answer, I will open it up to you. You come up with the question and answer it yourself, anything you like.
Okay, well, who is going to be the unifying candidates for the Libertarian Party? Who is going to step in and be the unifying candidates for the United States of America? Whomever it is, I think that our chances with Gray Sharp are good, but we understand that the country craves what we talk about as libertarians, that they crave to have some third person, some third party in there that will be an alternative to the 2 likely Republican and presidential candidates and Democrats. So we just need to be able to speak with each other. We'd be able to inspire. I still believe that inspiration works and scaring doesn't. So we're going to join together. I will support the nominee of the Libertarian Party. I am a Libertarian. I will be for life. I was a lifelong Republican until the passage of the so-called Patriot Act back in 2002. I understand, and I'm sure that you will agree with me both, that this was already, the Patriot Act was already written and on the shelf. They just used the 9/11 as an excuse to get it passed. That's what we're seeing today with regard to the coronavirus. So we will act with integrity. We are libertarians. We dispute, we combat, and the rest, but we are good-natured. We don't call each other names. And I can say that it's just been a pleasure to love fest or whatever, to be with you, Joe, and to be with you as well, Adam.
Okay, and let's see, the next question is from Judge Gray, your last question of this round, sir.
The last question, I believe, of any round, but okay. Joe, 9/11 was, we brought it up, 9/11 was a serious thing. It was an attack by Osama bin Laden upon the United States of America. Had you been president at that time, what would have been your response?
Well, can I back it up just a minute? Well, My response would have been to not pass the Patriot Act. I can tell you that. My response would have been, how do we make ourselves safer? Here's what I would like to say, though. If I were president, by the time this happened in September, Bush had already been in office long enough to bring our troops home. And this is what I use as an example. If we're not over there where we don't belong, then we don't have people going after us because, and I hate the phrase, I know it's trite, but the fact that they hate us. The Bushes, and Bush was in office at the time, the Bushes had repeatedly said, oh, Saudi Arabia loves us. Actually, the royal family of Saudi Arabia loved our royal family of the Bushes. However, the average Saudi Arabians did not love us Americans, as evidenced by the fact that most of the hijackers were, in fact, from Saudi Arabia. And now, and I hate even talking about this because it can be so misconstrued. Excuse me, but I'm going to try it anyway. Osama bin Laden did a horrible, horrible thing. It is not justified, okay? I'd like to point out, though, that he justified it by pointing out to people over there, look, the Americans lie. The president lies. They said they would be here temporarily. They're not. They're still here. They said they'd be gone by whatever date. They're not. They're still here. They said, and he just showed lie after lie after lie that the Americans gave to them. Again, that does not justify it. What I'm saying is it justified it to them. And so if we had been gone, if we had kept our word and only worried about us and not been policemen of the world, then we wouldn't have been in that position to begin with. But as president, of course, the first thing you do is you got to make sure you're safe, and spying on Americans and having the Patriot Act is not going to do it.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Jorgens, for that answer, ma'am. All right, Mr. Kokesh, the last question of this debate comes from you, sir.
Oh, I thought I already got an even number to each. I didn't know I had one left. Are you sure?
You started the round. You should be ending the round, correct?
All right, then.
Or no, I'm sorry. It's Judge Gray has a question still. Correct. I'm sorry, Judge Gray. Okay. You just asked Dr. Jorgensen. No, Mr. Kokesh, you are the last question, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, then I thought I did 2 and 2 already. So I guess my last question would be for Dr. Jorgensen. Joe, in terms of what you're proposing in terms of policy at the federal level, and this is a challenge that I get with my platform, is, how would you actually achieve it? And I think localization and having a national referenda on this makes it a little easier when we have a clear mandate from the American people, as opposed to, I'm going to be president, trust me to take these general directions. These are how I'm going to answer these questions. This is what I'm going to do in the first 100 days. But you're not going in with a clear, specific mandate from the American people to bring about this radical transformation, except as I do genuinely give you credit for, in the sense of transforming it in a meaningful way to a near voluntary institution, and at least in the ways that you would use the pardon power. But then if you have to fight a Congress that's not libertarian, what do you think you can practically do to achieve your policy initiatives?
Okay, well, first of all, if I'm elected president, I do have somewhat of a mandate. And the same people who voted for me for president also voted for the people in the House and Senate. And so if those people want to keep their jobs, then they need to realize that I was the one who was voted for president. I will tell you, I completely agree with you that many things need to be kept at the local level. That is one way that we trim the federal government. And I would absolutely propose that and rally around it. For instance, education. There should not be a Department of Education. The federal government should have absolutely nothing to do with education. So that would be like one of my first steps. Government, we're getting out of this as soon as possible. Absolutely, that should be done locally. Parents, teachers, school kids, and there are so many benefits from that. Charity needs to be done locally. If you look at the needs of, for instance, people in the Appalachian Mountains compared to the inner city of New York, completely different needs, completely different ways of going about solving them. That is not it's not something the federal government should be in. So we would take that and say, okay, this is going local. The federal government, we should not be taking local money an expensive middleman, as libertarians call it, and giving it back to you. So the things that should be local, and by the way, also police should be at a local level, not at a federal level. So all of those things I would put back into the local level, and I would try to cut government elsewhere wherever I could. For instance, the military. For instance, how they're spending money in healthcare, and as opposed to how they're spending their money inefficiently, as opposed to letting the patients be in charge. Right now, the federal government is in charge of how the money is spent rather than the individual patients.
Okay, and that concludes our rounds of questioning. I have calculated your guys' closing remarks time, and we start with Dr. Jorgensen. You have 4.5 minutes, ma'am.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So first of all, I would like to announce that just as we were starting the debate, I just looked at one last email before we got started. So this is breaking news. The Pragmatic Caucus has endorsed me. I am very honored for that, especially because I am adhering to the platform. And I think that shows that it's possible to adhere to the platform and still present things in a practical way. So what I would like to do is spend some time here talking about what I would do as the nominee. What I would do as the nominee is I would go around and explain to people practically how our plan is better than the Democrats and Republicans. Practically explain to them why liberty and freedom helps them. Again, if you go around and say, I'm from the Libertarian Party, I'm for freedom, their eyes glaze over. They say, well, we're the freest country in the world. And then they don't listen to anything we say. We have to show them how we are going to make their lives better. So without an income tax, each American family would save, on average, $12,000 conservatively. So they could buy a new car every few years, maybe take the family on a nice vacation, or replace that about to die furnace so they can go to sleep at night and not worry about waking up cold. By ending the drug war, again, I could go around and say it's my body and I can do what I want, but I'm not going to, because we've already attracted the people who are sold on that story, or are sold on that sales pitch. What we need to do is explain to people how we can help them by getting rid of the drug war, not because they want to use heroin, but because they will be safer. We can explain how organized crime would lose billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in illegal drug profits, how burglary, mugging, shoplifting would go down, how the street corner drug dealer would be gone. So we don't have, as a role model for people in the poorer cities, we don't have the role model as a criminal. The homes and streets would be safer with violent turf wars. Courts and jails would focus on the real bad guys. Also, I would ask the American people, okay, have you ever heard of a liquor store owner trying to sell your kid gin or vodka in the junior high playground? No. Have you ever heard of somebody breaking into somebody's house because they couldn't afford bourbon? No. The problems are not with the drugs. They're with drug prohibition. Yes, alcohol consumption did increase slightly after prohibition ended, but not by much. And alcoholism and social problems did not increase. There is absolutely nothing to show they would increase now. Healthcare in this country is a special interest-driven, poorly run system. As president, I would work to remove every government interference so that people could afford to go to the doctor. At 11 o'clock at night, they could find a clinic, as opposed to going to the inefficient emergency room where they have to wait 3 hours and pay exorbitant prices. It would be convenient when they needed it, higher quality with dramatically lower costs. I would also talk about open borders because, again, I would like to emphasize I follow the entire platform plank by plank. a lot of people don't realize that we had virtually open borders until the 1920s, and we did not have a problem. What I would like to do is allow productive immigrants into the United States to produce a stronger economy. You know, a lot of people say we need to let the immigrants in to help them. How about we let the immigrants in to help us, to help our economy? And we need to bring the troops home, have America, turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. Foster peace, stop human casualties, no more lives lost, no more crippled veterans, stop massive property damage caused by war, take away the reasons for people of foreign countries to hate Americans, reduce the threat of terrorism. The military should keep us safer, not put us in more danger. If you like what I have to say, go to joj2020.com. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And all right, our closing remark next comes from Judge Jim Gray. Sir, your closing remarks.
Well, and thank you again, CJ, and thanks to the South Dakota Party for hosting this. For a very long time, I have tried to be mainstreaming the libertarian message. We have made an enormous mistake, I believe, for the last decades, allowing other people to brand us. What do they brand us as? Oh, greed is good. Well, thanks, Ian Rand, and for selling novels, that works really well. And basically, she means you act in your own economic self-interest, which we all do. Everybody wins, but that's the label. Or kooks, or no government whatsoever, or everybody uses marijuana. You know, we've made that mistake. We are the only mainstream party in the United States of America today. So for numbers of reasons, I've been trying to mainstream that. Anytime I mention my name, I say libertarian. I'm proud to be a libertarian. I have a podcast that's been there for a year. It's called All Rise. I like that phrase, but All Rise, the Libertarian Way with Judge Jim Gray, just to make this a regular everyday occurrence. I wrote a book. In fact, it was a blog for about 5 years called 2 Paragraphs for Liberty, but now I've written it into a book. It's called 2 Paragraphs for Liberty, Solutions that are Practical, Effective, Responsible, Libertarian. And then it's by Judge Jim Gray, and with the word libertarian below it. So we need to just do this. The people of our country are ready to listen to us. We have these people all through the nation that are our constituents. So we will put in an audit. We will put in sunset provisions. Really importantly, when I was running for US Senate, this is one thing I would bring up to Republicans, Democrats, anyone else. They would all go with this. Yes, let's look at each federal agency, put a microscope on it, put a light on it, and say, what have you done for the last 5 years? What have you accomplished? What have you spent? What do you propose for the next 5 years? How much do you propose to spend? Oh, look, transparently, we don't need this anymore. Transparently, that's duplicated by the states. Transparently, let's get rid. Okay, you can do this small bunch, and we'll probably reduce your budget by 60% and go off, and you can do that. We will analyze all of these things. The Bureau of Indian Affairs will not stand scrutiny. The Department of Education, from my standpoint, won't stand scrutiny, and we will simply deprive them of a budget. That's the way you do it. So other things, we do need an FBI. I was a federal prosecutor. I'm not going to have the states try to trot all over the nation to find Bernie Madoff. You know, we do need a national police force, the FBI. We need to be under control. We don't need the DEA, believe me. No one has better credentials in fighting the war on drugs than Judge Jim Gray. But there are other things as well. Think of it this way. Today, we have 2 types of drugs. We have over-the-counter drugs and we have prescription drugs. If only that we would allow the pharmacists, who are trained much better than the GP medical doctors, as to the efficacy of various drugs and the combinations of drugs. Don't use this one with alcohol. Don't use this one with aspirin, whatever it happens to be. And allow the pharmacists to speak to the individuals and then be able to say, okay, yes, I would recommend this pharmaceutical drug for you. Instead of making the patients go first to their medical doctor, get a prescription, and then bring it. It's more expensive. Get the government out of making those requirements. These are all things that we libertarians will do. And so finally, before we end, you're worried about people coming into our country, and we should be a nation of immigrants, and we are, but we should stop creating so many refugees. The war on drugs does that. Certainly the war with regard to Iraq, which was the biggest mistake of my lifetime. So go to graysharp2020.com. You'll like what you see. I promise you that we will work hard. If you join us, if you support us, if you help us move mountains, or even if you don't, we will do you proud. You'll be able to take our campaign and show it proudly to your neighbors, to your friends, to your relatives. We will work together by inspiring people, but not scaring them. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Gray. The last, I was going to tell you, sir, you did have another 20 seconds there if you wanted. I forgot to give you your time, but my apologies. If you want 20 seconds, sir, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, let me ask you, it's the best play on words I've ever heard of, CJ. Do you know what you get when you mix an elephant and a rhinoceros? What do you get when you mix an elephant and a rhinoceros?
I'm not in the debate, sir, but what do you get?
The answer is Elephino.
All right, thank you, sir. Adam Kokesh, you used 2 rebuttals and had some time knocked off. You have 3.5 minutes, sir.
All right. Thank you so much, CJ. The federal government of the United States of America has become extremely corrupt, extremely destructive, extremely good at ripping us off, and keeping it going would be extremely irresponsible. And I have to say again, it is an honor to share this virtual stage with 2 former vice presidential nominees of the Libertarian Party, either of whom would be far greater than Cheeto Jesus or the Kid Sniffer. And what we have here, though, is I think the losing strategy that we have pursued in the past of playing their game, of making this about politics rather than about ethics. Principles are pragmatic. And the federal government is scarier than libertarianism could ever be at this point. Most Americans have recognized this. As a candidate, I know that I'm going to have the energy and the effort behind me as I have had in this primary to get this message in front of the American people. I've got the hustle. I've put in the time. I'm going to go and tour nationally, be in every city that we possibly can, focusing strategically on states that get us to a breakthrough. But we have to look at what works. And it's a bit of a fantasy to think that a candidate who hasn't had any major success, built any significant name ID, is magically going to become successful, waking people up, building the movement if they're the nominee. What I have proven in my activism with this campaign, with my fundraising records, is that we have a message that works, that supports local candidates, that leverages this name ID. And what you're offering when you play their game as a libertarian is looking at the difference between Republicans and Democrats going off a cliff at 70 or 80 miles an hour. And you're saying, hey, elect me. I'm a libertarian. I'll be a president and I'll make sure we only go off the cliff at 10 miles an hour. Well, the American people can smell through that crap. They don't want it. They want a real alternative. Keeping this system going is what's scary. And that's why I think taking the position of localization, of the ethical position of throwing the ring in the fire is working so well for this campaign. In 2016, if not voting was counted as a vote for nobody, the Electoral College results would have been Donald Trump 21, Hillary Clinton 72, and nobody for president in an epic landslide of historic proportions, 445 Electoral College votes. As I said already, before the polarization of Donald Trump, before the forced unemployment coronaphobia crisis we find ourselves in today, secession was polling over 25%. This is a unifying message to the point that even Donald Trump said he would support me if we would let him be the president of a state with no Muslims and no Mexicans. I say we let him have it. Let's give the American people what they want and win. Let's unify the American people around a practical, principled message that keeps America from going off the cliff, that's communicated in a way that is easily understood with a candidate who can deliver this message effectively. Finally, I just want to say thank you, CJ, for putting this together. I know in a small state like yours, you don't have a lot of volunteers that make it possible for us to be the awesome party of principle that we hope to represent. And for anybody who's watching who isn't already a member, please join the party of principle. Go to lp.org. And if you add /free membership, there's a secret link. You can join without giving us $25, but you should do it anyway. lp.org. Join the party of principle today. Thank you very much, CJ.
Yes, sir. And I want to thank personally Mr. Adam Kokesh, Judge Jim Gray, and Dr. Joe Jorgensen for their patience, for working with me through all of the technical difficulties. This was not an easy feat to do, but I am both humbled and honored that you guys would do this for our state and our party. Thanks you. I would like to let everybody know that the chairman of the Libertarian Party of South Dakota, Gideon Oaks, will be sending out a email to all of our convention attendees to vote for who you believe won tonight's debate. And I hope this was something that you guys enjoyed, because I get to watch you guys getting asked questions. I had always wanted to see you guys ask the questions, and I want to say that all of you answered and asked questions that were both thought-provoking and incredible to hear for a debate. So thank you on behalf of myself, and as you guys so graciously endorse me, I would be happy to cast my vote for any one of you should you win the nomination from this party. And with that, you guys, I thank you for your time, and you guys have a wonderful day.
Peace and love,
Thank
y'all.
you so much. Pleasure all mine.
Just vote 3 times, CJ.